My name is Stephanie Lake, and I'm the Director of the Criminal Justice Program and faculty member in the Department of Sociology at Adelphi. As a form of human expression, art has the power to open minds, to encourage empathy, to breed understanding, and to move people to question the status quo and fight for change. It's toppled dictators and inspired revolutions, raised voices and saved lives, given power to the powerless, and purpose and direction to billions of people around the world. By using their art as an innovative medium for awareness, artists become advocates, challenging the biggest issues of our time. From sculptures addressing systemic racism to murals celebrating Indigenous communities, public art is making a real-world social impact that deserves to be celebrated. Well-known examples of art that catalyze social change include every type of expression, including the AIDS Memorial Quilt and Keith Haring's murals, Pablo Picasso's Guernica, to Banksy, to the Guerrilla Girls. Music from Beethoven to Billie Holiday, Woody Guthrie and Coltrane, John Lennon and Marvin Gaye, Public Enemy and Kendrick Lamar. Films and plays, including Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, West Side Story, and Rent. The poets William Blake, Langston Hughes, and Walt Whitman, Maya Angelou, Sojourner Truth, and Sylvia Plath, all spoke in radical terms about the need for human societies to reform. We are humbled and thrilled when Adelphi alumna Carolina Cambronero Varela and Jennifer Govan, library director and senior librarian at Teachers College Columbia, invited us to work with them on this interdisciplinary, multi-institutional collaboration. The initiative, Artivism, Art for Social Transformation, builds upon the ideas posed in the book, Illustrations of Social Imagination, Learning from Maxine Greene, which was co-edited by Adelphi faculty Courtney Lee Wida and Dolapo Adeniji Neal, as well as Carolina Cambronera Varela. The year-long initiative serves as a platform for Artivist presenters and student ambassadors to share their work, to inspire and to challenge the audience to engage their sociological imagination, to see the world with fresh eyes. Through multimodal events, presenters will share how art, research, community outreach, and other creative endeavors serve as a means to transform the status quo. The goal of this initiative is to generate a movement for social activism in light of the recent and ongoing social unrest, and to nurture and inspire change. Over the next year, participants will have the opportunity to engage with community artivists, faculty, staff, alumni, and students from Adelphi, Columbia, and other institutions in the region. To see the full listing of events, please go to the Artivism website. If you'd like to get more involved as a presenter, as a student ambassador, please feel free to either contact me or Carolina. Our contact information is included on the website. Finally, and before I introduce today's student ambassador, I'd like to thank all those responsible for making the series happen. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Jennifer Govan and Carolina Cambronero Varela, whose initial idea for the book talk evolved into a year-long initiative. I'd also like to thank the authors of the book, which inspired it all, Adelphi faculty Courtney Lee Wida and Dolapo Adeniji Neal, who along with Carolina, co-edited the inspiring book, Illuminations of a Social Imagination, Learning from Maxine Greene. On the Adelphi side, none of this could have been pulled together without the incredible hard work and dedication of adjunct professor R.J. Agilarakis, Sarah Avery in the sociology department, and Jenna Ventura, a graphic design student in the art department who worked tirelessly in creating and editing the series logo. I'd also like to thank Associate Dean Maggie Lally and Dean Vincent Wang in the College of Arts and Sciences for all their support, as well as the web team, communications, and outreach representatives who continue to work with us in arranging the website and getting the word out to the community. I'd like to conclude this introduction with one of my favorite quotes from anthropologist Margaret Mead. "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." I'm delighted to introduce today's student ambassador, Olivia Mabey, who will begin today's presentation. Olivia is a junior at Adelphi University studying fine arts and business. She's also the vice president of Kappa Pi and founder of IPAC, Indigenous Peoples Awareness Coalition. Thank you for agreeing to serve as our very first student ambassador, Olivia.
Thank you, Professor Lake. As she has said and introduced me, I'm a junior at Adelphi. I am an art major minoring in business management. Through Kappa Pi, over the summer we raised $750 and we donated that to multiple Black Lives Matter fundraisers, and successfully through a community organization. That was honestly a great event and fundraising event. I'm also a part of IPAC and a founder and organizer. And last semester, we organized Adelphi's first ever Native American Heritage Month celebration, where we organized 4 events. 3 out of the 4 revolved around the arts, where we showcased filmmakers, contemporary artists, digital artists, fashion designers, and traditional art makers. And through those events, we got to share Native American culture with the community and showcase amazing art. And hopefully that we left an impact on people through those initiatives. And I'm excited to continue on these clubs and organizations, and hopefully next semester we'll be able to organize even more in-person events. Well, I'd like to thank Professor Lake for choosing me as your ambassador. And to introduce Professor Cynthia Tabar to you. Cynthia is an artist, activist, scholar, archivist, and oral historian who is passionate in creating interactive, participatory stories documenting social change. Professor Tobar is an assistant professor and head of archives at the Bronx Community College, where she creates captivating, socially engaging art programming and leads community-based archiving and storytelling projects. She's also a doctoral student in the higher and post-secondary education program at Teachers College. Please welcome Professor.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much. And thank you to the Adelphi University and Gottman Library at Teachers College colleagues, as well as all the organizers, Carolina, and the whole team for inviting me to talk today and share my thoughts about my work as a producer of socially engaged art programming and community-based archiving and storytelling projects at Bronx Community College. So I'm going to set this up, and if I will also share a copy of these slides later so that if folks wanted to later on review it, and please feel free to share with all the participants after we're done with the Zoom presentation today. So a little bit about where I work. In pre-pandemic times, this would be where I would come to work every day, the beautiful campus at Bronx Community College. In the late 1800s, it was formerly NYU. New York University sought to relocate its expanding campus away from the growing congestion of Washington Square to the more pastoral locale of what is now currently University Heights in the Bronx. Largely made possible by financial backing from Helen Gould. The construction of the new campus was spearheaded by Dr. Henry McCracken, Chancellor of NYU from 1891 to 1910. And these buildings still stand on the campus today. I just love this aerial shot because it does the best job of sort of capturing just the magnificence of what that campus actually looks like today. And I don't know if you could see where my pointer is showing, but in this big empty spot is now where the new library building where the archives is located is actually in existence. So this is a pre-1965 photo aerial shot of the NYU campus and the surrounding buildings. So it's become part of a nationally landmark campus in the Bronx, and the Hall of Fame for Great Americans, which is this whole structure that surrounds the whole building of the Gould Memorial Library, as well as these other buildings designed by McKim White of McKim, Mead and White, the famous architect. You may have seen his work if you've ever gone to Grand Central Station. He was part of that the architectural history of the in design, and also was responsible for designing buildings on the Columbia University campus. It is significant, this monument, not only because it's the birthplace of fame as we know it today, but it was the first Hall of Fame in the country. the first to not only commemorate persons of achievement across just military and political leaders, but also authors, educators, architects, inventors, judges, theologians, philanthropists, humanitarians, scientists, statesmen, artists, musicians, actors, and explorers. This variety was unprecedented at the time, when only political leaders or those who achieved glory in war could expect such public commemoration. The Hall of Fame broke new ground by democratizing who was considered worthy of fame and acclaim. Upon its dedication in 1901, NYU Chancellor McCracken wrote that the Hall of Fame will teach youth that leaders in science and scholarship may be as great as military and naval heroes. The Hall was extremely popular, both in the involvement of everyday Americans in nominating their favorite great Americans and the installation events when the busts were placed in the Hall. McCracken himself envisioned the first Hall of Fame in the US having what he deemed a democratic election, very much like our presidential elections from previous years. Nominations came to the election center, and after a person received a certain number of votes, the NYU Senate, which was composed of 100 voters, would make the final choice. The Senate was composed of American leaders such as former American presidents, presidents of NYU, as well as other various college campuses across the country, senators and men of renown in various fields of intellectual endeavor. In the first election for the Hall of Fame, 29 men were elected. The lack of women, however, created a scandal, and the next election, 8 women were elected. So currently in the monument, there are about 11 women in the Hall of Fame. This picture that you see right here is of Lillian Wald and her unveiling ceremony for her bust. And as the election rules that I showed in the previous slide in regards to the documentation that we currently have in our archives of the elections in 1912, 1920, and 1976, show that the election rules were continually modified to reflect an initiative by the electors to winnow down the number, or the huge number of nominations that were being received by the public, which had its strengths and as well as its faults in creating this democratic vision that McCracken had originally envisioned for the Hall of Fame. So the Hall of Fame has many unique contributions to make to the discussion regarding whether those excluded will be free to decide who is a great American. In 1973, NYU sold its University Heights campus to the Dormitory Authority of the state of New York for use for Bronx Community College, which was founded in 1953 as the first community college in the Bronx, but never had an official physical home. So it basically wandered from several buildings along Jerome Avenue in the Bronx until it finally got its first permanent physical home in 1973, which was this campus. With this wonderful monument, which commemorated largely white achievement on a campus that by the late 1970s boasted the highest number of Black and Latinx students in the CUNY system when Bronx Community College students started to come to the campus to learn. Since the archives itself was established in 2014 when I came on board, we as a result have embraced a community-based archiving approach. And this approach acknowledges the reality of the disparities in the historical record that too often have been excluded from mainstream representations in American history and traditional archival practice. And you can argue as well in the way that public art has been reflected in the last century. This approach helps us to better consider what it means to be an American through the inclusion of marginalized narratives. Such an approach implores those of us who work in archives and memory work to reflect on who we are doing this memory work for. Reflecting on the removal of the Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson busts in the hall in 2017, there is a greater urgency for us to explore how we can effectively challenge the power dynamics behind these past decisions and collectively reimagine what it means to be a great American. This is a particularly interesting snapshot that we have in our photograph collection in the archives for the Hall of Fame on the campus. This shows, is depicting the unveiling ceremony of Robert E. Lee's bust on the Hall of Fame, which in 2017, as you could tell from that famous tweet by Governor Cuomo, had to come down. The fallout was very quick and severe. There'd never really been anything like that done before on the campus or since. As of now, the official word on the campus is that this monument, while the pedestal remains empty, it is still, the monument itself, the bust itself is safely on the campus, being set aside for historical preservation work on the actual sculpture, because it is a national landmark monument. But again, it's sort of like what we see reflected in the last few years. What began in 2017, we see echoed not only throughout different cities in the South, but when people think about the Bronx, they don't think, oh, we have Confederate statues. We actually did, and they were effectively removed in 2017. However, a year before, in 2016, the Archives was awarded a grant by the Diversity Projects Development Fund at CUNY to develop an online exhibit on the Hall of Fame, focused on achievement, inclusion, diversity, and power. The result was our digital exhibit, Visions of Greatness at BCC, Rethinking Racial Disparities at the Hall of Fame. And I'm just gonna see if I can stop sharing that screen so I can share the other screen that I have up, which has our digital exhibit. So let me know with a thumbs up if you're able to actually see it. Wonderful. This was what we were basically funded to do, this online exhibit, which basically had us thinking about questions to examine, such as how is fame and accomplishment defined and determined? What is its actual value to society, and what impact of fame do we see on those who have been recognized and those who have been excluded? And we had some contributors, not just history professors on our campus, but we also sought out community leaders and social justice advocates in the Bronx to write essays featuring the themes that we touched upon within this exhibit, such as topics around historical exclusion, accomplishment and opportunity, issues of representation. The idea was to really build a level of engagement to create an easy to access digital tool for interaction with the monument itself, and to welcome public participation in this idea of what a re-envisioned Hall of Fame could look like. And you'll see here, there's a button where we created our own virtual Hall of Fame, which sort of is our hope in the future to, once we get the Hall of Fame revitalized, whenever that shall be. Now we get these inquiries all the time at BCC Archives. We are not in charge of the nomination process for the Hall of Fame. It's basically been at a standstill since 1976. The last bust to actually be erected into the Hall of Fame was that of Theodore Roosevelt, and that was in 1983. So it's been a long time. But if we were to nominate somebody, what would that process be? And that was basically the impetus for a lot of the programming that we've been trying to do as a result of this. So this virtual hall, and this was in 2016 when we developed this site, we wanted to really try to get folks within the community, as well as anybody, to sort of crowdsource this idea of who you would nominate. And you would be free to put in your entry and then sort of photo, and it could be anybody of national reputation, such as Martin Luther King, who actually did come in the 60s to speak to BCC students. We do have documentation that proves that, as well as local Bronx legends. Miriam Colon, the founder of the Puerto Rican Traveling Theater. Fantastic. So the Hall of Fame, in essence, it's a symbolic memorial. It's not just channeling an earlier version of history, but it's also, it could be argued, legitimizing that version of history, thus the tension and the controversy around the Confederate statues. And many could argue there are still controversial figures that still remain at the Hall of Fame currently. A critical reframing of this history can impact how we go about implementing more culturally responsive forms of commemoration. And this work has been the basis for the further outreach that I've been seeking through the archives to be at the center of this, not to shy away from controversy, but to really center it and to think of different ways of approaching things that we need to talk about. And this spirit of inclusion is what inspired our public event in September of 2019, which seems like so long ago. But when we think about being outdoors and participating, but yes, we, in September 21st, 2019, we hosted this Reclaiming the Hall of Fame public event, which was attended by hundreds of neighborhood residents. And it was a beautiful day. We couldn't have asked for better weather and a better turnout. Through a year-long planning process that included academic as well as community stakeholders, we posed a challenge for artists through our art call, giving them room to explore the evolving historical context of commemoration at the hall by referencing our archival collection, centered on the question of, were we able to establish a Hall of Fame for great Americans today? Who would we include in this group? That was the prompt. Throughout the day-long event, participating artists took a stab at answering that question with creative interventions, which included photo documentation, sculpture, storytelling, performance, and film. And some highlights of the event included the Nicaraguan American Bronx-based Bodoma Garifunda culture band, which you could see on the stage, I think on the, on the right side of the screen. You ever have that moment where you have a hard time telling your right from your left? That's me right now. So then the Garifunda band, they are a Bronx local band, and they kicked it off with a vibrant drumming, singing, and dancing performance, highlighting the musical culture of Nicaraguan American citizens in the country, in the Bronx, in the city. The Five Borough Story Project on the left hosted a local storytelling event, which was around the theme of unsung great Bronxites. So for folks to share who they consider a great Bronxite in their lives. And it featured the Hall of Fame as a backdrop. And you can even see on the lower left-hand side, there was even a staged protest march by these artists for the inclusion of DJ Kool Herc, who created hip hop in the Bronx in 1973 in neighboring Sedgwick Avenue as a Hall of Fame nominee. So there were a lot of really great highlights that this exhibit was able to yield. What was really interesting on the right-hand side, the exhibit also included a scale model of a bust of Robert E. Lee, which was removed from the hall in 2017, but this one was covered with fungus, a metaphor for the lost cause myth of the Civil War, according to artist Zach Landsberg. And the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture and Teen Curators program partnered with us not only to screen student interns' works who they would nominate, were they able to nominate a nominee for the Hall of Fame, but we also were able to collaborate with them in developing a K-12 curriculum guide to continue the conversation for educators and the public by incorporating humanities perspectives to examine themes of inclusion and diversity. And you could see on the left-hand side, one of my favorite performances of the day was a team of female muses playing rhythm instruments who wove their way through the hall in a performance choreographed by multidisciplinary artist Alana Weiss and her troupe. So we had a wide breadth of, these are just a few of the samplings of the folks that we had perform that day. So drawing upon these personal and collective experiences from our public art event, we delved into the ways art can inform inclusion and diversity, and in turn, how social justice struggles might ground our ongoing work to increase engagement with the Hall of Fame and the archives. And it being Black History Month, but for me, I feel like every month is Black History Month. Let's not sort of tokenize it, but that's just my opinion. I thought in honor of the month, we would feature Booker T. Washington here being featured in this old archival photograph of the Hall of Fame, and one of the Black artist Barthay, who was the sculptor, and you could see he's right there mentioning the work of art to electors of the Hall of Fame. So it's a pretty significant picture and one of the only few African Americans featured in the Hall of Fame currently. But that's sort of like what we wrestle with currently, those of us who work with public art and thinking about community art events and socially engaged art making, thinking about how we wrestle with how best to commemorate greatness and fame. We are trying our best at the archives at Bronx Community College to respond creatively to troubling histories while activating the archives to be more culturally responsive stewards of history, acknowledging that power is central to these conversations around who gets to be nominated, who gets to be celebrated, and who doesn't. And perhaps when we envision what a future Hall of Fame could look like, perhaps it could become this sort of synthesis of the known and the unknown, and what brings us new perspectives on our past. And we're hoping that this can expand our understanding to the extent that these sorts of imposed invisibilities that Maxine Green spoke of in a lot of her scholarship and work can help us grasp these collective definitions of what it means to be a nation and what it means to be a citizen. And that's all that I have for today.